wooden crate, a dying baby, a cowboy who'd lost everything. When Ethan Cole heard that cry echoing across the barren Texas plains, he had no idea he was about to stumble into a fight that would shake Red Willow County to its core. Inside that sealed box, baking under the merciless sun, was a secret someone powerful wanted erased, a child left to die in silence. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some men, no matter how broken, can't walk away from an innocent voice crying out in the darkness. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. The heat that August afternoon could kill a man if he wasn't careful. Ethan Cole knew that better than most. He'd spent the last 8 years learning exactly how unforgiving this land could be, how it took and never gave anything back except dust and silence. He rode the fence line out past Red Willow Creek the way he did every Tuesday, checking posts, looking for breaks in the wire, keeping his hands busy so his mind couldn't wander to places it shouldn't go. The gelding beneath him, a sorrel named Rust, picked his way carefully across the cracked earth, ears flicking at the occasional grasshopper that burst from the dried grass. Ethan was 42 years old and looked 50. The sun had carved lines deep into his face, and his eyes, once a bright, clear blue, had faded to something harder, something that looked right through people instead of at them. He wore his hat low, the brim shadowing features that rarely changed expression anymore. His shirt was sweat-stained and dusty, his jeans worn white at the knees. He was a man who'd learned to live small, to want nothing, to expect less. The fence stretched ahead of him in a straight line toward the horizon, posts marching into the shimmer of heat that made the distance waver like water. He'd covered maybe 3 miles of the property when Russ suddenly stopped, head up, nostrils flaring. "What is it, boy?" Ethan's voice came out rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days. The horse sidestepped, nervous, ears pinned back. Ethan listened, hearing nothing but the wind moving through the dry grass and the distant call of a hawk. He was about to nudge Rust forward when he heard it. A sound so out of place, so impossible in this empty landscape, that for a moment his brain refused to process it. Crying. A baby crying. Ethan went absolutely still in the saddle. His hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. For one terrible second, he was back in that other place. That other time, hearing sounds he'd spent 8 years trying to forget. The therapist in Amarillo had called them auditory hallucinations, said they were normal for someone with his kind of trauma, that his mind was trying to process what it couldn't accept. But Rust heard it too. The horse was dancing sideways now, whinnying softly, every muscle tense. This was real. Ethan swung down from the saddle, his boots hitting the ground hard. The crying came again, thin and weak, barely audible over the wind. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the landscape. Nothing but scrub brush and fence posts and that line of cottonwoods down by the creek bed, their leaves gray-green and rattling in the breeze. The creek. He started walking, then running, Russ trailing behind him on loose reins. The crying grew slightly louder as he crashed through the brush toward the water, or what passed for water this late in summer. The creek was down to a trickle, pools of muddy water separated by stretches of cracked clay. And there, half hidden in the shade of the cottonwoods, 20 feet from the water, was a wooden crate. Ethan's heart stopped. It was maybe 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, made of rough pine boards nailed together. The kind of crate you'd use for shipping tools or machine parts. Someone had drilled air holes in the top, small holes barely a 1/4 inch across. The crying was coming from inside. He hit his knees beside it, hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the boards. The crate was sealed with nails, and for a moment blind panic threatened to overwhelm him. He had no tools, nothing to pry it open with, and that crying was getting weaker, thinner, like whatever was inside was running out of strength. "Hold on," he said, not knowing if he was talking to the baby or to himself. Hold on, hold on." He ran back to Rust, yanked open his saddlebag, and grabbed the small toolbox he always carried. His fingers fumbled with the latch, spilling wrenches and screwdrivers into the dirt. He snatched up a flathead screwdriver and a pair of pliers and sprinted back to the crate. The nails screamed as he pried them out, 4 on each side, his hands bleeding where he'd torn a fingernail half off in his haste. The crying had stopped. That was worse than the sound. That terrible silence that meant he was too late, that he'd failed again, that another child had slipped through his fingers into the dark. "No," he said through gritted teeth. "No, no, no." The last nail came free and he threw the lid aside. The smell hit him first, urine and excrement and something else, something that made his stomach turn. Inside the crate, wrapped in a filthy blanket, was a baby. A girl, he registered dimly. Maybe 3 or 4 months old. Her skin was bright red from the heat, her lips cracked and bleeding. She wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed, her tiny fists clenched against her chest. Ethan's hands moved before his brain caught up. He lifted her out of that hellbox as gently as he could, cradling her against his chest. She was so light, too light, her body radiating heat like she was burning from the inside out. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, her fontanelle, that soft spot on top of her head, sunken and wrong-looking. Severe dehydration, heat stroke, maybe brain damage if she'd been out here too long. "Come on, baby girl," he whispered, carrying her to Rust. "Come on, stay with me." He had a canteen on his saddle, half full of lukewarm water. He wet his finger and touched it to her lips, letting a tiny amount seep into her mouth. Her tongue moved. Just barely, but it moved. She was still alive. Ethan had no idea how he got back on the horse with the baby in his arms. Muscle memory, maybe. Pure adrenaline. He kicked Rust into a gallop, something he never did in this heat, but nothing else mattered except getting this child to town, to Dr. Reed, to someone who could help. The 7 miles back to Red Willow took forever and no time at all. Rust ran like he understood the stakes, his hooves pounding the hard earth in a rhythm that matched Ethan's racing heart. The baby didn't cry, she didn't move. Ethan kept talking to her anyway, a steady stream of words that meant nothing and everything. "You're going to be okay. We're almost there. Just hold on a little longer. I've got you. You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you. I promise. I promise." Empty words. He'd made promises before, but this time would be different. This time he wouldn't fail. Red Willow came into view, a scatter of buildings along the main road, population 847, the kind of town people pass through on their way to somewhere else. Ethan thundered down Main Street past the feed store and the diner and the post office, people turning to stare as Russ slid to a stop in front of the medical clinic. "Lucas!" Ethan was off the horse before it stopped moving, hitting the door with his shoulder. "Lucas Reed, I need you now!" Dr. Lucas Reed appeared from the back room, a tall man in his 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He took one look at what Ethan was carrying, and his expression went from annoyed to focused in half a heartbeat. "Exam room 2, now." Ethan followed him into the small examination room, laying the baby down on the padded table under the bright overhead light. Lucas was already pulling on gloves, grabbing instruments, his movements quick and efficient. "Where did you find her?" "Wooden crate, out by the creek on the Thompson property. She was sealed inside." Lucas's hands paused for just a fraction of a second, then kept moving. "How long has she been there?" "I don't know. Hours, maybe. The crate was baking in the sun." Jesus Christ. Lucas had the baby's filthy blanket off now, examining her. "She's in severe hypovolemic shock. Temperature is," he checked his thermometer, 106.3. "We need to cool her down, get fluids in her, and pray her organs haven't started shutting down." He moved to the sink, calling out toward the front desk. "Margaret, I need you in here. Bring me 4 bags of pediatric saline and the infant IV kit. Move." Margaret Henley, the clinic's only nurse, appeared in the doorway. She was in her 50s, round-faced and usually smiling, but there was no smile now. She saw the baby and went pale. "Dear Lord in heaven." "Save it for later, Margaret." "Celine, now." Ethan stood back, trying to stay out of the way as Lucas and Margaret worked. They stripped the baby down, revealing skin that was blistered in places from the heat. Lucas swabbed her tiny arm and inserted an IV on the first try, something Ethan distantly recognized as skilled work given how dehydrated she was, how collapsed her veins must be. "Ethan." Lucas didn't look up from what he was doing. "Was there anything else in the crate? A note? Identification?" "Nothing, just her and a blanket." "Anyone see you? Anyone else around?" "No one. It's empty land out there." Thompson's been dead 2 years. His kids are fighting over the estate. No one's working the property. Lucas nodded, running cool cloths over the baby's burning skin. This wasn't an accident. Someone put her out there to die. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan had known it the moment he saw that sealed crate, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a different way. Someone had looked at this infant, this helpless, innocent child, and decided she should die. Had nailed her into a box and driven her out to the middle of nowhere and left her in the heat like garbage. Who would do this? Margaret's voice shook. Who could do something like this? I don't know, Lucas said quietly, but we're going to find out. The next 2 hours were the longest of Ethan's life. He sat in the waiting room, his bloody torn hands clasped between his knees, and listened to the sounds from the exam room. The beeping of monitors, the quiet murmur of Lucas's voice. Once the baby cried, a thin, pitiful sound that cut right through him, and he found himself on his feet without realizing he'd moved. Margaret came out around 4 o'clock, pulling off her gloves. Her eyes were red. She's stable, for now. Ethan's breath came out in a rush. She's going to make it? Too soon to say. The next 24 hours are critical. Her core temperature is down to 101.7, which is good, but we're watching for organ damage, seizures, brain swelling. Lucas wants to monitor her overnight here before we consider moving her to the hospital in Amarillo. Can I see her? Margaret hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Don't touch anything. Ethan walked into the exam room like a man approaching a cliff edge. The baby was in a small hospital crib now, clean, wearing a tiny diaper and nothing else. Her skin still too red, but not the angry, blistered crimson it had been. Tubes ran from her arm to an IV stand. Monitors beeped softly, tracking vitals Ethan didn't understand. Lucas sat in a chair beside the crib, writing notes on a chart. He looked up when Ethan entered. She's a fighter, he said quietly. Most babies wouldn't have survived what she went through. Ethan stared down at the tiny form. She was asleep now, or unconscious. He couldn't tell the difference. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Her fists were still clenched, like even in sleep she was holding on to something. How old is she? 3 to 4 months, based on her development? Caucasian? No obvious birth defects or genetic abnormalities. Someone took care of her, at least for a while. She's been fed, she's had medical care. There's a small scar on her abdomen that looks like it might be from surgery, but it's healed well. So someone loved her, Ethan said slowly. Took care of her for months, and then put her in a box to die. Or someone else did. We don't know the circumstances yet. We need to call the sheriff. Lucas nodded. Already did. Tom's on his way. As if summoned by his name, Sheriff Tom Briggs pushed through the front door of the clinic. He was a big man, 6'3" and solid, with a weathered face and eyes that missed very little. He'd been sheriff of Red Willow County for 12 years, and before that, he'd been a Texas Ranger. Nothing much shocked him anymore, but when he walked into that exam room and saw the baby, something flickered across his face. Ethan, Lucas. He nodded to each of them, then looked down at the crib. This is the child? This is her, Lucas confirmed. Tell me everything. Ethan went through it again. The fence line, the crying, the crate, the desperate ride back to town. Tom listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, the sheriff pulled out a small notebook and pen. Show me exactly where you found her. I need to see the scene before we lose the light. They took Tom's truck, leaving Rust at the clinic hitching post. Ethan directed him down the main road, then onto the dirt track that led to the Thompson property. The sun was lower now, painting the landscape in shades of amber and gold, beautiful and completely indifferent to human suffering. The crate was still there where Ethan had left it, lid thrown aside, the space inside it stained and dark. Tom photographed it from every angle, then walked in widening circles around the site, studying the ground. 2 sets of tire tracks, he said, crouching down. One's yours. I recognize Rust's shoes. The other is a vehicle, something with wide tires. Truck, maybe, or SUV. He moved to the crate itself, examining the wood without touching it. Pine boards. Fresh cut, not weathered. These nails are new too. Someone built this recently, specifically for this purpose. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was planned. Oh, this was definitely planned. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. They drove out here, probably early this morning, left the crate, and drove away. They chose this spot because it's isolated, because no one comes out here anymore. They counted on her not being found. But I did find her. Tom straightened, looking at Ethan with an expression that might have been respect. You saved her life. If you'd ridden the north fence line instead, if you'd come out here tomorrow instead of today, if your horse hadn't heard her crying, she'd be dead. The word hung between them. Dead. A 3-month-old baby, dead in a box in the middle of nowhere, and no one would have ever known. She would have just disappeared, a mystery no one bothered to solve. I need to take the crate, Tom said, and I need to ask you not to talk about this. Not yet. Why not? Because whoever did this thinks she's dead, and I want to keep it that way until we figure out who they are. They loaded the crate into the bed of Tom's truck, handling it carefully even though every instinct in Ethan's body wanted to smash it to pieces. Back at the clinic, Tom took Ethan's statement in more detail, asking questions that seemed random but probably weren't. Anyone new in town lately? Not that I've noticed. Any talk about missing babies? Pregnant women who disappeared? No. Anyone asking about the Thompson property, trying to access it? Ethan started to shake his head, then paused. Wait. Last month, Victor Hale sent his foreman out there, said he was interested in buying it once the estate settles. Tom's pen stopped moving. Victor Hale. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Victor Hale owned half of Red Willow County, the ranch land, the processing plant, the bank. What he didn't own, he controlled. He'd been a fixture in the area for 40 years, a self-made man who'd built an empire through ruthlessness and connections. People respected him because they were afraid not to. That doesn't mean anything, Tom said, but his voice had changed, become more careful. Hale's interested in a lot of properties. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. I'm sure you're right. But they both knew it meant something. In a county this small, everything meant something. It was nearly dark when Ethan finally left the clinic. Lucas had insisted the baby would be fine overnight, that there was nothing Ethan could do, that he should go home and get some rest. But as Ethan climbed back on Rust and turned toward his small ranch on the outskirts of town, he knew sleep was impossible. His place was 15 acres of scrub and struggling grass, with a small house he'd built himself 8 years ago when he'd first come to Red Willow. It was neat and spare. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a kitchen that barely counted as such. He kept no photographs, no mementos, nothing that could trigger memories he couldn't afford to have. He unsaddled Rust, rubbed the horse down, and made sure he had feed and water. Then he walked into the house and stood in the middle of his small kitchen, still smelling smoke that wasn't there, still hearing cries that had finally, mercifully, gone silent 8 years ago. His daughter's name had been Emma. She'd been 2 years old. She'd died in a house fire that Ethan had caused, not intentionally, never intentionally, but the result was the same. He'd been working late in his workshop, welding, and a spark had caught on some oily rags. By the time he'd smelled the smoke, by the time he'd run back to the house, the flames had already taken the second floor where Emma slept. His wife Sarah had been at her mother's that night. She'd come home to find firefighters pulling Ethan away from the burning building, his hands blistered and bloody from trying to claw through the walls to reach his daughter. They'd pulled Emma out 20 minutes later. She'd died of smoke inhalation. The medical examiner said she'd never woken up, that she hadn't suffered. Ethan had never believed that. Sarah had left 3 weeks after the funeral. She'd looked at him with eyes that held nothing, not hatred, not love, just a vast emptiness, and said she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't look at him and see Emma. Couldn't live in a world where their daughter was gone and he was still here. He'd signed the divorce papers without reading them. Let her have everything, the house, the insurance money, all of it. Then he'd gotten in his truck and driven until he couldn't drive anymore, ending up in Red Willow, Texas, a town he'd never heard of, working odd jobs until he'd saved enough to buy this patch of land and build this small house and convince himself that he could live with what he'd done. For 8 years, he'd succeeded. He'd built a life of routine and isolation, of fence lines and silence, of days that bled into each other without meaning or pain. He'd learned not to feel too much, not to want too much, not to let anyone close enough to hurt him or be hurt by him. And then today, He'd heard a baby crying in the wilderness, and everything had cracked open again. Ethan walked to his bedroom and opened the top drawer of his dresser. In the back, wrapped in a faded bandana, was the only thing he'd kept from his old life, a small silver bracelet with a name engraved on it, Emma. He held it in his palm, feeling the weight of it, the memories it carried. His hands were shaking again. "I couldn't save you," he whispered to the empty room. "But I saved her. That has to mean something. It has to." The bracelet had no answer. The house had no answer. The darkness pressing against the windows had no answer. But somewhere in town, in a clinic that smelled of antiseptic and hope, a baby girl with no name was breathing because Ethan Cole had refused to walk away. And for now, for tonight, that would have to be enough. He wrapped the bracelet back in its bandana and put it away. Then he lay down on his bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, and waited for morning to come. At the clinic, Lucas Reed sat beside the baby's crib, monitoring her vitals, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. The door opened quietly, and Clara Whitmore slipped inside, carrying a small bag. Clara was Red Willow's elementary school teacher, a woman in her late 30s with soft brown hair and eyes that held old sadness. She'd heard about the baby. News traveled fast in a small town, and had come as soon as her evening duties were done. "How is she?" Clara asked softly. "Holding her own," Lucas replied. "Temperature's down to 99.8. Vitals are stabilizing. She's a tough little thing." Clara set down her bag and looked into the crib. Something in her expression shifted, softened in a way that was almost painful to watch. She reached out, then stopped, her hand hovering over the baby's tiny fist. "Can I—" "Go ahead." Clara's finger touched the baby's palm, and instantly, reflexively, those tiny fingers curled around it. The grip was weak but deliberate, and Clara made a small sound in her throat that might have been a sob or a laugh, or both. "She's beautiful," Clara whispered. Lucas watched her carefully. He knew Clara's story. Everyone in Red Willow knew it. 4 years ago, she'd given birth to a daughter 3 months premature. The baby had lived for 6 hours. Clara had held her for every minute of that time, had whispered love and promises into her daughter's ear until the moment she'd stopped breathing. After that, Clara had thrown herself into teaching, into loving other people's children, into building a life around the hole her daughter had left behind. But Lucas had seen the way she looked at babies, the hunger and the pain that flickered across her face. "I brought some things," Clara said, pulling items from her bag. "Clean blankets. Baby clothes? Newborn size, but they might fit. Some formula and bottles, just in case." "That's kind of you." "She'll need someone to watch her. When she's released from the hospital, someone to take care of her until—" Clara trailed off because they both knew there was no until. No parents rushing to claim her. No family coming forward. Just a mystery and a crime and a baby who shouldn't have survived. "I could do it," Clara said quietly. "I could take care of her. Temporarily, of course, just until they find where she belongs." Lucas studied her, seeing the hope and the desperation and the fear of hope in her eyes. "Let me talk to Tom Briggs. We have to follow protocol. But Clara, don't get too attached. This isn't your daughter, and we don't know how this is going to end." "I know," Clara said, but her finger was still curled in the baby's fist, and Lucas knew she was already too late for his warning. They were all too late. Ethan, Clara, Lucas himself, all of them looking at this nameless infant and seeing second chances, seeing redemption, seeing something that had been lost and miraculously found. But someone out there had tried to kill this baby. Someone with resources and planning and a cold enough heart to seal an infant in a box and leave her to die in the August heat. And when they learned she had survived, when they discovered that their terrible secret was about to come to light, there was no telling what they might do to protect themselves. Lucas looked at the baby sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware of the storm gathering around her, and felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. This was only the beginning. The baby opened her eyes for the first time at dawn. Lucas had dozed off in the chair beside her crib, his reading glasses askew on his face, when a small sound pulled him back to consciousness. Not crying, just a tiny whimper, the sound of someone waking up in a strange place. He sat forward, rubbing his eyes, and found himself looking into a pair of blue-gray eyes that were watching him with the solemn intensity only babies possess. "Well," "Hello there," he said softly. The baby blinked at him. Her color was better this morning, still flushed, but no longer that terrifying crimson. Her breathing had evened out during the night, and her temperature had held steady at 98.9. Against all odds, she was going to survive. Lucas checked her IV, made notes on her chart, then carefully lifted her from the crib. She was so light in his arms, her head wobbling slightly as she tried to focus on his face. He delivered maybe 300 babies over his career, had held countless infants, but something about this one hit different. Maybe it was knowing what she'd survived. Maybe it was knowing someone had wanted her dead. "You're safe now," he told her, knowing the promise was premature, possibly even a lie. "We've got you." The front door of the clinic opened, and Ethan Cole stepped inside. He looked like he hadn't slept. His hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But there was something in his expression when he saw the baby awake and alert that made Lucas's throat tighten. "She made it through the night," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "She did. Strong vitals, good responsiveness. I think we're out of the critical window." Ethan moved closer, stopping a few feet from Lucas, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Would it be okay if I held her?" Lucas handed the baby over without hesitation. Ethan took her carefully, cradling her against his chest with the awkward gentleness of someone who'd once known how to do this but hadn't practiced in a long time. The baby studied his face with those serious eyes, one tiny hand reaching up to grab at his collar. "Hey, little one," Ethan murmured. "You gave us quite a scare." Lucas watched them together and made a decision. "Ethan, I need to ask you something. This baby is going to need care when she's released from here. Normally, we'd contact child services, put her in the system until they sort out what happened. But given the circumstances, given that someone tried to murder her, I'm not comfortable with that. Too many people knowing where she is, too much bureaucracy." Tom agrees with me. "What are you suggesting?" "Private placement. Someone local who can keep an eye on her, keep her safe until we figure out who did this. Clara Whitmore volunteered last night." Ethan's jaw tightened. Clara Whitmore lost a baby. "I know, but she's also one of the most capable, caring people in this town, and she wants to do this. Wanting to do something and being ready to do it are different things." "I agree, which is why I'm asking if you'd be willing to help, to be part of this. Clara can provide the day-to-day care, but you found her, Ethan. You saved her life, and I think you need this as much as Clara does." Ethan looked down at the baby in his arms. She'd fallen asleep again, her small body relaxed and trusting against his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. 8 years ago, I let my daughter die. I don't trust myself with children anymore. 8 years ago, you made a mistake. Yesterday, you saved a life. Those are both true. The question is which truth you're going to let define you." Before Ethan could respond, the clinic door opened again, and Tom Briggs walked in, followed by Clara Whitmore. The sheriff looked grim. Clara looked hopeful and terrified in equal measure. "We need to talk," Tom said. "All of us." They gathered in Lucas's small office at the back of the clinic, 5 adults crowded into a space meant for 2, speaking in low voices so Margaret wouldn't overhear from the front desk. Tom spread several photographs on Lucas's desk. They showed the wooden crate from different angles, close-ups of the nails and wood grain, tire tracks in the dirt. "I sent these to a friend at the Texas Rangers," Tom said. "He ran the tire tread through their database. It's a match for Goodyear Wrangler Duratrack, size 275/70 R18. That's a heavy-duty tire, the kind you'd see on a luxury truck or SUV. Not common in these parts. Most folks run cheaper brands." "How many vehicles in the county would have those tires?" Lucas asked. "Maybe 20. I'm working on a list. But here's the thing. The wood itself is distinctive, pine, but treated with a specific kind of preservative. I checked with the lumber yard in town. They don't carry it. The nearest place that does is Morrison's in Amarillo." Clara leaned forward. "So someone drove to Amarillo to buy wood to build that crate? Or they already had access to that kind of lumber? Construction company, maybe. Someone who works in building or development." Tom paused. "Someone like Victor Hale." The name dropped into the room like a hand grenade. Ethan, still holding the baby, went very still. You can't be serious, Clara said. Victor Hale is one of the most respected men in the county. He's on the church board, he donates to the school. He's also ruthless as hell, Tom interrupted quietly. And his daughter Rebecca came back to town about 6 months ago after living in Dallas for 2 years. Word is, she left suddenly, no explanation. And she hasn't been seen in public since she returned. Lucas removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. You think the baby is Rebecca Hale's daughter? I think it's a possibility we need to investigate, quietly. This is insane, Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. If Rebecca had a baby, people would know. The whole town would know. Not if Victor wanted it kept secret. Not if he had enough money and power to make sure no one talked. Tom gathered up his photographs. I'm going to make some calls, do some digging. In the meantime, I need to know this child is somewhere safe. Lucas, what's her medical status? She can be released in 48 hours if she continues improving, but she'll need round-the-clock care, monitoring, proper nutrition. I can do that, Clara said immediately. I have the whole summer off. I can take her to my house, set up a nursery. Not your house, Tom cut in. If someone wants her dead badly enough to put her in a box in the desert, they'll come looking when they realize she survived. And Clara, you're too visible. Everyone knows where you live, what car you drive. You'd be an easy target. Then where? Clara's hands were clenched in her lap. We can't just keep her at the clinic. Ethan spoke for the first time since Tom arrived. My place. Everyone turned to look at him. My ranch is 15 acres outside town. Only one access road, and you can see anyone coming from half a mile away. I've got security, nothing fancy, but motion sensors, cameras, and no one pays attention to what I do. I keep to myself. He looked at Clara. You could stay there, both of you, for as long as it takes. Clara's eyes widened. I couldn't impose like that. You wouldn't be imposing. I have a spare room. It's not much, but it's clean and private. And if Tom's right, if someone is looking for her, they won't think to check with me. I'm not connected to anything in this town. I'm nobody. You're the man who saved her life, Lucas said quietly. That makes you somebody. Tom nodded slowly. It could work. Ethan's place is isolated enough to keep her hidden, but close enough to town that Clara could get help fast if needed. And having both of you there means someone's always watching her. What about food? Supplies? A baby needs a lot of things. Clara was already making mental lists, her teacher's mind organizing the logistics. I'll handle it, Margaret's voice came from the doorway. They all jumped. None of them had heard her approach. She stood there with her arms crossed, her round face set in determined lines. I've been listening, and before you scold me for eavesdropping, let me say this. That baby deserves to be protected, and if you folks are willing to do it, then I'm willing to help. I can buy supplies in Amarillo where no one knows me. Diapers, formula, clothes, whatever you need. I'll bring it all out to Ethan's place in unmarked boxes. Tom started to protest, then stopped. You understand this could be dangerous, Margaret. If you're right about who's involved, I raised 4 children and buried 1 husband, Sheriff. I know all about dangerous, and I know what's right. She looked at the baby in Ethan's arms. Someone tried to throw that child away like garbage. Over my dead body will I let them finish the job. The decision was made in that moment, though no one actually said the words. They spent the next hour working out details. Clara would pack a bag and move to Ethan's ranch that evening. Lucas would release the baby into their care in 2 days, providing medical supplies and instructions. Margaret would handle shopping runs, and Tom would investigate quietly, carefully, trying to connect the threads without alerting whoever had tried to kill an infant. She needs a name, Clara said as they were wrapping up. We can't just keep calling her the baby. Ethan looked down at the small face resting against his shoulder. She was awake again, making small cooing sounds, her fingers wrapped around the fabric of his shirt. Something in his chest that had been frozen for 8 years cracked just a little bit more. Maya, he heard himself say. Her name is Maya. Clara smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Maya, it's perfect. And a middle name? Rose, Lucas suggested. My grandmother's name, for new beginnings. Maya Rose, Clara repeated softly. Hello, Maya Rose. Welcome to your family. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and growing tension. Clara moved into Ethan's spare room with the efficiency that spoke of long practice at adapting to new situations. She'd been a military wife before becoming a teacher, had moved 17 times in 12 years before her husband died in Afghanistan. She knew how to make a temporary space feel like home. Ethan watched her transform his stark guest room into a nursery. She hung soft curtains over the windows, arranged the crib Margaret had procured from somewhere, set up a changing table, organized supplies with military precision. She worked without talking much, but Ethan caught her sometimes standing in the doorway just looking at the room, her expression a complicated mix of joy and grief. "You okay?" he asked on the second evening, finding her there again. Clara startled, then smiled. "I keep thinking about Emma, my daughter. She would have been 4 years old now. Sometimes I wonder what she would have looked like, what her voice would have sounded like, if she would have liked books or sports or music." She touched the edge of the crib. "This is the first time since she died that I've let myself hope for something. It's terrifying." "I know the feeling." She turned to face him fully. "Lucas told me about your daughter, about the fire. I'm sorry, Ethan. It was a long time ago." "Grief doesn't care about time. It just is." She paused. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really offer to let us stay here? It's not just about keeping Maya safe, is it?" Ethan looked past her into the nursery, at the empty crib waiting for a child who should have died. "When I heard her crying out there in the desert, for just a second I thought I was losing my mind. I thought my brain had finally broken and I was hearing things that weren't real, and then I realized she was real, and that meant I could save her. I could do the thing I couldn't do 8 years ago." He met Clara's eyes. "I don't know if that makes me a good person or just a selfish one." "It makes you human," Clara said softly. "We're all trying to save the children we lost. That's not selfish. That's love that doesn't know where else to go." They brought Maya home on a Thursday morning. Lucas drove them in his personal truck, the baby secured in a car seat Margaret had somehow produced. She was dressed in a soft yellow onesie, her dark hair wispy and clean, her eyes bright and alert. She'd gained 4 ounces in 3 days and was feeding well, her tiny body already responding to proper care. Ethan led them into the house, suddenly seeing it through Clara's eyes. The bare walls, the minimal furniture, the total absence of anything personal or warm. It was a place to sleep and eat, nothing more. A house, not a home. "I know it's not much," he started. "It's perfect," Clara interrupted firmly. "It's safe and it's quiet and it's ours for as long as we need it. That's everything." She took Maya into the nursery while Lucas went over medical instructions with Ethan. How to check for fever. What symptoms to watch for. When to call if something seemed wrong. Emergency numbers were programmed into both their phones. Lucas had even rigged up a baby monitor system that connected to Ethan's cell. "You're basically a pediatrician now," Lucas said with a slight smile. "How does it feel? Like I'm going to screw this up?" "Probably, but you'll figure it out. And Clara knows what she's doing." Lucas gathered his medical bag. "Tom's going to swing by every couple of days just to check in. Keep the curtains closed as much as possible. Don't answer the door unless you're expecting someone. And if anything feels off, anything at all, you call me immediately." After Lucas left, the house fell into a strange quiet. Ethan stood in his kitchen, listening to Clara sing softly to Maya in the other room, and realized his life had completely changed in less than a week. 7 days ago, he'd been alone in this house, moving through his routines like a ghost. Now, there was a woman in his spare room and a baby who needed constant care and a mystery that could get them all killed. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt more alive than he had in 8 years. That night, Clara made dinner. Actual food cooked with care, not the canned soup and sandwiches Ethan usually survived on. They ate at his small kitchen table while Maya slept in the nursery, the baby monitor crackling softly between them. "Tell me about your wife," Clara said. "If you want to." Ethan set down his fork. "Sarah. We met in college. She was studying architecture. I was in engineering. We built a house together, designed every room, every detail. It was supposed to be our forever home." He paused. "After Emma died, she couldn't look at it anymore, couldn't look at me. I don't blame her." "Do you still talk to her?" "No. Last I heard, she remarried, living in Colorado. I hope she's happy." Clara nodded slowly. My husband's name was David. He was career Army, deployed 4 times. The last time, he didn't come back. They said it was an IED, that it was fast, that he didn't suffer. 3 months later, I went into premature labor. Emma was born at 26 weeks.
She had his eyes. Her voice caught. I held her for 6 hours. I sang to her. I told her about her daddy, and then she was gone. I'm sorry. Me too. She looked at him across the table. We're quite a pair, aren't we? 2 broken people trying to protect someone else's broken piece. Maybe that's exactly what she needs. They fell into a routine over the next few days. Clara handled most of Maya's care, feeding, changing, the endless cycle of infant needs. But Ethan found himself drawn into it anyway. He'd wake at 2 a.m. to the sound of crying and find Clara already up, warming a bottle. He'd take over so she could sleep, walking the floor with Maya against his shoulder, humming songs he didn't remember learning. The baby was thriving. Her skin had returned to a normal color. She was gaining weight steadily. She smiled now, real smiles, not just gas, and her eyes followed movement, tracked faces. She responded to Clara's voice with coos and gurgles, reached for Ethan's fingers when he held them out. Tom stopped by on Sunday evening, parking his truck behind the barn where it couldn't be seen from the road. He looked tired and frustrated. "I've been digging into Victor Hale," he said, accepting the coffee Ethan offered. Quietly, carefully, his daughter Rebecca did come back to town 6 months ago. According to the housekeeper I talked to, a woman named Maria Santos worked for the Hales for 20 years. Rebecca was pregnant when she arrived. Clara went pale. Was? Maria says Rebecca gave birth at home, attended only by a private doctor from Amarillo. No hospital records, no birth certificate filed. And 3 days after the birth, Rebecca was told the baby died. There was a small funeral, supposedly, private ceremony. But Maria says she never saw a body, never saw proof. Just Victor telling his daughter the baby was gone and to never speak of it again. Oh my God, Clara whispered. Maria also says Rebecca's been heavily sedated since then. Barely leaves her room. Victor's keeping her isolated, supposedly for her mental health. Tom pulled out his notebook. I tracked down the doctor who attended the birth. Guy named Gerald Rosen. His practice is in Amarillo, but he's got some questionable marks on his record. Accusations of falsifying medical documents, prescribing unnecessarily. Nothing proven, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Can you bring him in for questioning? Ethan asked. On what grounds? I've got no proof he did anything illegal, and if I push too hard, Hale will know someone's investigating. That could be dangerous for you, for Clara, for Maya. Ethan stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over his property, painting the scrub grass gold and orange. So what do we do? Just wait? Hope Hale doesn't figure out Maya's alive? We build a case, Tom said firmly. Carefully, methodically. I've got a friend at the FBI who specializes in parental kidnapping and child trafficking. I've sent him the details. If we can prove Maya is Rebecca's daughter, if we can prove Hale orchestrated her abandonment, we can bring federal charges. But we need evidence. DNA, witnesses, documents. Rebecca would need to testify, Clara said quietly. Would she do that? Against her own father? I don't know. But we need to reach her first, and that's going to be nearly impossible with Hale watching her so closely. They talked until dark, strategizing, planning, arguing in circles. By the time Tom left, they were no closer to a solution, but at least understood the magnitude of what they were facing. They weren't just protecting a baby from a nameless threat. They were going up against the most powerful man in the county, a man with resources and connections and absolutely no moral boundaries. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Around 1 a.m., he heard Maya start to fuss. He waited for Clara to get up, but the crying continued. Maybe she was exhausted. Maybe she'd finally crashed. He pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and padded down the hall to the nursery. Maya was in her crib, not screaming but whimpering, her small face scrunched up in distress. Ethan lifted her carefully, supporting her head the way Clara had shown him. Hey, little one, what's wrong? You hungry? He carried her to the kitchen and warmed a bottle, testing the temperature on his wrist like he'd seen Clara do.
Maya latched on immediately, sucking with the desperate intensity of the very young. Ethan sat down in his worn armchair, cradling her, watching her tiny hands clutch at the bottle. She was so small, so vulnerable. 8 years ago, he had held his own daughter like this, had felt this same protective fierceness, this need to keep her safe from every possible harm, and he'd failed. He'd looked away for one moment, had made one careless mistake, and Emma had paid the price. "I won't let that happen to you," he whispered to Maya. "I promise. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe." The baby's eyes drifted closed, milk-drunk and content. Her breathing evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep. Ethan just sat there holding her, not wanting to put her down, not wanting to break this moment of peace. He didn't hear Clara until she spoke from the doorway. "You're good with her." Ethan looked up. Clara wore an old t-shirt and pajama pants, her hair mussed from sleep. She looked younger like this, softer. She was crying. "I thought you might need the rest." Clara came and sat on the arm of the chair, looking down at Maya's sleeping face. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me I can't do this, that I'm not qualified, that I don't have the right. I lost my chance once already. That wasn't your fault. And Emma wasn't yours. But we both carry it anyway." She reached out and gently touched Maya's tiny hand. "Maybe that's why we're the right people for this. We know how precious it is, how fast it can be taken away." They sat together in the quiet darkness, two broken people and one sleeping baby, and for just a moment it felt like family. Not the family they'd lost, not the family they'd planned for, but something new. Something built from ruins and hope and stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. The moment shattered 3 days later when Margaret called, her voice shaking. "Someone's been asking questions in town. A man, maybe mid-30s, expensive suit. He's showing people a photo of a baby, asking if anyone's seen her, claiming to be a private investigator looking for a missing child." Ethan's blood went cold. "What kind of photo?" "I couldn't get a good look, but Ethan, he was at the clinic this morning, talking to Lucas, and he was very interested in any unusual pediatric cases from the past week." "What did Lucas tell him?" "Nothing. Said he couldn't discuss patients. But this man, he wasn't taking no for an answer. He's going business to business, house to house. Someone's going to talk eventually. Someone's going to remember you riding in with a baby, or Clara buying supplies, or something." After Margaret hung up, Ethan found Clara in the nursery, changing Maya's diaper. Her hands were steady, but her face was pale. "You heard?" "I heard. What do we do?" Ethan looked at Maya, babbling happily on the changing table, completely unaware that the monsters were closing in. "We prepare, and we trust that Tom can figure this out before they figure out where we are." But even as he said it, Ethan knew they were running out of time. The secret was too big, the stakes too high. Eventually, someone would put the pieces together, and when they did, everything would come apart. Part ba. Louis? Viet saungin den saungin nam chum, du linket linmak vikak fun chuok chongko. The man in the expensive suit found them on a Tuesday morning. Ethan was out checking the motion sensors along his property line when he noticed the black Mercedes sedan turning onto his access road. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator that had finally located its prey. He felt his stomach drop as he pulled out his phone and dialed Clara. "Someone's coming. Get Maya into the safe room. Now." They'd prepared for this. The week before, Ethan had converted a section of his basement into a concealed space. Reinforced door, separate ventilation, stocked with supplies. It was paranoid and probably unnecessary, but Clara had insisted. Now he was grateful for her foresight. "I'm on it," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear he could hear underneath. The line went dead. Ethan walked back toward the house, positioning himself on the porch, as the Mercedes pulled to a stop in his driveway. The man who emerged was exactly as Margaret had described. Mid-30s, expensive gray suit that had no business in ranch country, mirror sunglasses that hid his eyes. He moved with the controlled confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Mr. Cole," the man's voice was smooth, professional. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a private investigator working on behalf of a client. I wonder if I might have a moment of your time. Depends on what you're investigating." Webb pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket and held it up. Even from 10 feet away, Ethan could see it was a professional photo of a baby, not Maya, but close enough that his heart rate spiked. 3 or 4 months old, dark hair, wrapped in a pink blanket. I'm looking for this child. She went missing approximately 2 weeks ago under circumstances that have her family very concerned. Yes. I've been told you were involved in some kind of incident with an infant around that time. I'm hoping you might have information that could help. Ethan kept his expression neutral. His hands relaxed at his sides despite every instinct screaming at him to reach for the shotgun inside the door. Don't know what you're talking about. I live alone out here. Don't see many people, certainly no babies. That's interesting because I have multiple witnesses who saw you riding into town with an infant in your arms about 10 days ago, creating quite a scene at Dr. Reed's clinic. Surely you remember that. You've been misinformed. Webb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He took a step closer. Mr. Cole, I understand you might be trying to protect someone. That's admirable. But this situation is more complicated than you realize. The child in question belongs to a very prominent family. They want her back. They have resources you can't imagine, and they will use every tool at their disposal to locate her. Sounds like a threat. It's a statement of fact. This family has already contacted federal authorities. FBI is involved. If you're harboring this child, you're looking at serious charges: kidnapping, obstruction. These aren't minor offenses, Mr. Cole. You could spend the rest of your life in prison. Ethan held the man's gaze, reading the layers beneath the polished surface. Webb was good at his job, but he was also nervous. His left hand kept drifting to his pocket, a tell that suggested he was recording this conversation, which meant he didn't have enough evidence yet. He was fishing. Like I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Now, if you don't mind, I've got work to do. Webb's smile faded. You're making a mistake. When we find that child, and we will find her, everyone who helped hide her will face consequences. Think about that carefully. He turned and walked back to his Mercedes, his movements unhurried. But Ethan noticed the way his eyes scanned the property, cataloging details. The barn, the outbuildings, the windows of the main house. He was mapping the location, preparing for what came next. The sedan disappeared down the access road in a cloud of dust. Ethan waited 5 minutes, then went inside and called Tom. We've got a problem. Tom arrived within the hour, his truck rattling up the driveway with an urgency that matched Ethan's anxiety. Clara had already brought Maya up from the safe room, and the baby was fussing in her arms, picking up on the tension that filled the house like smoke. Marcus Webb, Tom said, pulling up information on his phone. Former FBI, actually, worked organized crime for 6 years before going private. Now he specializes in high-value recovery cases. If Victor Hale hired him, he paid serious money. He knew about me bringing Maya to the clinic. Someone talked, or someone put the pieces together. Webb's good at his job. He probably canvassed every medical facility within 100 miles, showed that photo, asked the right questions. Tom looked at Clara, at Maya. We need to move you. Today. This location is compromised. Move us where? Clara asked. Tom, we can't just keep running. Eventually they'll find us. And what happens to Maya then? I don't know, but staying here isn't safe. Neither is running. Clara's voice was firm. If Webb knows about Ethan, he probably knows about me too. He'll be watching for us to relocate. The moment we move, he'll follow. At least here we're on familiar ground. We have some defenses. Ethan looked between them. There's another option. We go on offense instead of defense. Tom raised an eyebrow. Explain. Webb said the family contacted federal authorities. That means they're trying to make this official, legal. But if Maya really is Rebecca Hale's daughter, if Victor really did try to have her killed, then he can't go to the FBI with the truth. He'd incriminate himself. Which means whatever story he told them is a lie. So we expose the lie, Clara said slowly, understanding. We get to Rebecca before they do, get her to tell the truth. Tom shook his head. I've been trying for a week to get access to Rebecca. Victor's got her locked down tight. Private nurses, security, the whole property is like a fortress. And even if we could reach her, she's been heavily medicated. Her testimony might not be reliable. What about the housekeeper, Maria Santos? Would she help us? Maybe. but she's terrified of Victor. It took me 3 conversations just to get her to admit Rebecca had been pregnant. Tom paced to the window, staring out at the empty landscape. We need something concrete. Medical records, DNA evidence, something that proves Maya is Rebecca's daughter beyond doubt.
I can get DNA, Lucas said from the doorway. They all jumped. None of them had heard him arrive. He stood there with his medical bag, his face set in determined lines. I still have Rebecca as a patient on record. I did her annual physical 3 years ago. Her blood type is on file, along with some other medical markers. If I can get a sample from Rebecca now and compare it to Maya's DNA, we can establish maternity definitively. How are you going to get a blood sample from Rebecca? Clara asked. You just said she's locked down. She has a standing prescription for anxiety medication that needs monthly monitoring. Usually the pharmacy delivers it, but I could offer to do a house call, say I want to check on her personally given her recent trauma. Victor might allow it. He wants to maintain the appearance of caring for his daughter. Tom looked skeptical. That's a big risk. If Victor suspects anything, then he suspects. But we're running out of options and we're running out of time. Lucas set his bag down. Webb being here changes everything. They're mobilizing resources. Soon it won't matter how well hidden Maya is. They'll come with warrants and federal agents, and we won't have any legal standing to refuse them. The room fell silent except for Maya's soft cooing. She was playing with Clara's hair, completely oblivious to the war being waged over her future. Ethan watched her tiny fingers wrap around a strand of brown hair and felt something fierce and protective surge through his chest. Do it, he said. Lucas, make the house call. Get the DNA. But we need backup. Tom, can you position yourself near the Hale property, just in case things go wrong? I can. But Ethan, if this blows up, we're all going down. You understand that? I understand that if we do nothing, Maya goes back to the people who tried to murder her. I'll take my chances with the alternative. Lucas made the call that afternoon. Ethan listened from the kitchen as Lucas spoke to someone, a nurse probably, explaining his concern for Rebecca Hale, his desire to check on her recovery personally. There was a long pause, muffled conversation on the other end, then Lucas's careful professional voice saying he could come by tomorrow morning if that worked better for everyone's schedule. When he hung up, his hands were shaking slightly. Victor himself got on the line. Wanted to know why I was suddenly so interested in Rebecca's well-being. I told him I'd heard about the baby, about the loss, and as her physician, I felt responsible for monitoring her mental health. Did he buy it? I think so. He agreed to the visit. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Lucas sat down heavily in one of Ethan's kitchen chairs. I've been a doctor for 37 years. I've delivered babies, I've told parents their children wouldn't survive the night, I've made impossible decisions in emergency rooms. But I've never been this scared. Clara put a hand on his shoulder. You're doing the right thing. The right thing could get us all killed. That night passed slowly. Clara tried to maintain Maya's normal routine, feeding, playing, putting her down for sleep at 8 o'clock. But the tension in the house was palpable. Ethan checked the security cameras every 30 minutes. Tom called twice with updates that weren't really updates, just nervous check-ins to confirm everyone was still okay. Around midnight, Ethan found Clara sitting in the dark living room, staring out the window at the empty landscape beyond. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. Every time I close my eyes, I see Emma. My Emma. The way she looked in the hospital, hooked up to all those machines that couldn't save her. She was so small, Ethan, so perfect. And I couldn't do anything except hold her and wait. Clara's voice broke. I can't lose another child. I can't go through that again. Ethan sat down beside her. Maya's not your daughter. I know, but it feels like she is. These past 2 weeks, taking care of her, watching her grow stronger, hearing her laugh. It's like some part of me that died with Emma came back to life. And now they want to take her away, and I don't know if I can survive it. Then we make sure they don't take her. How? Victor Hale owns this county. He has money, power, connections. What do we have? A cowboy? A teacher, a small-town doctor, and a sheriff whose jurisdiction ends at the county line. We're outmatched in every possible way. Maybe, Ethan conceded, but we have something he doesn't. We have the truth. And we have people who give a damn about what happens to Maya.
That has to count for something. Clara turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face in the darkness. When did you become an optimist? About the same time I realized I had something worth fighting for. Lucas's house call was scheduled for 10 the next morning. He left at 9:30, his medical bag packed with standard equipment plus several vials for blood collection hidden in a false bottom. Tom was already positioned on a service road half a mile from the Hale Ranch, close enough to respond quickly, but far enough to avoid suspicion. Ethan and Clara waited at the ranch with Maya, the hours crawling by with agonizing slowness. Every sound made them jump. Every car on the distant highway made Ethan reach for his phone. Maya, oblivious to the stakes, played happily on a blanket on the floor, babbling to her toys. At 10:47, Lucas called. "I'm out. I got the sample." Ethan put the phone on speaker so Clara could hear. "Any problems?" "Nothing major. Victor watched me like a hawk the entire time, but I kept everything professional. Rebecca..." Lucas paused. "Rebecca's in bad shape. Heavily sedated, barely responsive, but I managed to ask her some questions while I was checking her vitals. Asked about the baby, about what happened. Victor tried to shut down the conversation, but Rebecca grabbed my hand. She looked right at me and said, 'She's alive, isn't she? My baby's alive.'" Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "She knows. She knows something, or suspects. I couldn't push it without alerting Victor, but the way she looked at me, it was like she was begging me to confirm it. I think somewhere under all that medication, she's been hoping her baby survived." "Did you tell her anything?" "No, too dangerous. But I'm running the DNA comparison now. I should have preliminary results by tonight. If Maya is Rebecca's daughter..." "She is," Clara said firmly. "I know she is." "Then we'll have proof, legal, scientific proof that Victor Hale tried to murder his own granddaughter, and that changes everything." The DNA results came back at 11:43 that night. Lucas called with trembling in his voice, the sound of a man who'd just witnessed something that shook his professional foundations. "It's a match. 99.97% probability that Rebecca Hale is Maya's biological mother. I've never seen markers this clear. Ethan, Clara, we have absolute proof." Ethan looked at Clara, saw his own fierce triumph reflected in her eyes. They had the evidence they needed. Now came the hard part. Tom arrived at midnight with copies of everything Lucas had compiled. DNA reports, medical records, Maria Santos's sworn statement that she'd witnessed Rebecca's pregnancy, and the subsequent disappearance of the baby. Even the testimony of the man who'd built the wooden crate, a construction worker named Dale Morrison, who'd broken down under Tom's careful questioning and admitted Victor Hale had paid him $5,000 to build a box, no questions asked. "It's enough," Tom said, spreading the documents across Ethan's kitchen table. "It's enough to bring charges. Attempted murder, child endangerment, conspiracy, federal charges that bypass Victor's local influence." "When do we move?" Ethan asked. "Tomorrow. I've been coordinating with the FBI agent I mentioned. He's bringing a team down from Dallas. They'll execute warrants on Victor's property, on his businesses, on every location we can connect to this case. And they'll take Rebecca into protective custody, get her the medical help she needs." "What about Maya?" Clara's arms tightened around the baby sleeping against her shoulder. "What happens to her?" Tom's expression softened. "That's complicated. Legally, she should go to her mother. But given Rebecca's condition, given everything she's been through, the court will likely appoint a guardian until she's stable enough to care for a child. Could be months. Could be longer." "We could be her guardians," Clara said immediately. "Ethan and I. We've been caring for her. She knows us, trusts us." "Clara," Tom's voice was gentle, "you're not family. You have no legal claim. The court will look for blood relatives first. Rebecca might have other family members who could take custody." "Rebecca's family is Victor Hale, the man who tried to kill her daughter." "I know, and I'll make sure the judge knows it too. But I can't promise you'll get to keep her." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. After everything they'd done, all the risks they'd taken, Maya might still be ripped away from them, given to strangers, or worse, to some distant relative who saw her as an obligation rather than a blessing. Ethan stood abruptly, unable to sit still. He walked to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond his property. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was sleeping peacefully in his mansion, confident in his power, certain his secrets would stay buried. He had no idea the storm that was coming.
I want to be there, Ethan said. When you arrest him, I want to see his face when he realizes he lost.
Tom started to object, then stopped. All right, but you stay in the car, you stay out of the way. This is a federal operation. Any interference and you'll be arrested too. The FBI arrived at dawn. 3 black SUVs, 8 agents in tactical gear, warrants for Victor Hale's arrest, and the search of his properties. Tom had convinced the lead agent, a stone-faced woman named Catherine Rhodes, that Ethan's presence could be valuable since he'd been the one to find Maya, the key witness who'd started this entire investigation. Ethan rode in Tom's truck, following the convoy down the highway toward the Hale Ranch. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold. It should have been beautiful. Instead, Ethan felt nothing but cold anticipation. The Hale Ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of prime land. The main house, a sprawling colonial structure that screamed old money and older power. The gates were closed, but the FBI didn't bother with pleasantries. They cut the lock and rolled through, vehicles fanning out across the circular driveway. Ethan watched from Tom's truck, parked just outside the gate, as agents pounded on the front door. It opened after a moment, and Victor Hale appeared, wearing a silk robe, his gray hair immaculate despite the early hour. Even from a distance, Ethan could see the shock and fury that crossed his face as Agent Rhodes showed him the warrant. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. Rhodes's voice carried across the morning air, cold and professional. You have the right to remain silent. This is absurd. Victor's voice was sharp, authoritative. I'm calling my lawyer. You have no right to come onto my property with these ridiculous accusations. We have every right, and we have evidence. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. What happened next would be burned into Ethan's memory forever. Victor Hale, one of the most powerful men in Red Willow County, a man who'd built an empire through intimidation and control, was handcuffed on his own front porch. His neighbors, his employees, the people he dominated for decades, watched as he was led to a federal vehicle in his bathrobe and slippers, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. But Ethan wasn't watching Victor. His eyes were on the second-floor window where a pale face appeared. Rebecca Hale, looking down at the chaos below, her expression a complicated mix of terror and something that might have been hope. Agent Rhodes disappeared into the house with 3 other agents. They were gone for 20 minutes. When they emerged, they were supporting Rebecca between them, her body frail and unsteady, her eyes glazed from medication. A nurse followed, protesting loudly about moving a patient in her condition, but Rhodes ignored her. Rebecca was placed in a separate SUV, gentle hands guiding her into the back seat. As the vehicle passed Tom's truck on the way out, Ethan saw her turn to look back at the ranch, at the prison her father had made for her. Tears streamed down her face. Tom's phone rang. It was Maria Santos, the housekeeper, calling from inside the house. Sheriff, you need to see this. There's a room, a nursery, that's been locked since the baby was born. We just got it open. You need to see what's inside. They found evidence Victor had planned everything. Documents showing payments to Dr. Rosen for falsifying the birth records, for telling Rebecca her baby had died. Receipts for the wooden crate, for the preservative-treated lumber. Even a journal where Victor had documented his reasoning. His daughter had shamed the family, had refused to name the father, and the child was evidence of her sin that needed to be eliminated. The nursery itself was the worst part. It was fully furnished, decorated in soft pinks and yellows, filled with toys and clothes and everything a baby might need. Victor had prepared it, had his staff set it up, knowing the entire time that the child who was meant to sleep there would never arrive. It was a shrine to his deception, a room built to convince Rebecca her baby had been real and loved, even as he was orchestrating her murder. Ethan stood in that room, surrounded by federal agents photographing evidence, and felt sick. This wasn't just about power or control. This was something darker, something twisted beyond normal comprehension. Victor Hale had looked at his own granddaughter and seen only a problem to be solved, a complication to be erased. The trial preparation took 3 months. Victor Hale hired the best defense attorneys money could buy, a team from Dallas who specialized in impossible cases. They tried every angle, challenging the DNA evidence, questioning the credibility of witnesses, claiming Rebecca had been mentally unstable and had abandoned the baby herself. But the evidence was overwhelming. Dale Morrison, the construction worker, testified about building the crate. Dr. Rosen offered immunity in exchange for his cooperation, confirmed he'd falsified records at Victor's request. Maria Santos, no longer afraid, described watching Rebecca's heartbreak, watching Victor manipulate his daughter while plotting murder. And then there was Jonah Miller. Jonah appeared 2 weeks into the trial, a quiet man in his late 20s with carpenter's hands and honest eyes. He'd been Rebecca's boyfriend 3 years ago, had loved her truly, had wanted to marry her. But Victor had discovered the relationship and threatened him. Leave town and never contact Rebecca again, or face fabricated charges that would put him in prison. Jonah had left, believing it was the only way to protect Rebecca. He'd settled in New Mexico, tried to build a new life, but never stopped thinking about the woman he'd left behind. When he saw news coverage of the trial, when he learned about the baby, he'd driven straight back to Texas. "That's my daughter," he said in court, his voice shaking. "Rebecca and we were going to run away together. She was 3 months pregnant when her father found out. He threatened to kill me if I didn't leave. I thought if I went away, he'd let her be. I didn't know he'd—" His voice broke. "I didn't know he'd try to kill my child." The courtroom was silent. Rebecca, sitting in the gallery with Clara beside her, began to weep. She'd been slowly recovering over the past months. The medications reduced, her mind clearing. But the weight of everything she'd lost, the boyfriend driven away, the baby she'd been told was dead, the years stolen by her father's cruelty, was almost too much to bear. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Victor Hale stood as the judge read the sentence: 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. His empire would be dismantled, his assets seized, his name forever associated with the attempted murder of an infant. Everything he'd built, everything he'd fought to protect, turned to dust in a single moment. As the bailiffs led him away, Victor turned to look at Rebecca one last time. She met his eyes, and Ethan saw something he'd never seen before in her expression: strength. She'd survived his control, his manipulation, his attempt to destroy the thing she loved most. And she'd won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Tom ran interference, while Ethan and Clara guided Rebecca to Tom's truck, Maya securing Clara's arms. The baby had grown so much in 3 months. She was sitting up now, reaching for things, babbling in proto-language that almost sounded like words. She saw Rebecca and smiled, reaching out tiny hands. Rebecca took her daughter carefully, her whole body trembling. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered. "Hi, Maya Rose. I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to hold you again." Maya grabbed Rebecca's finger and laughed, delighted by this new person who smelled right, who felt right, who some deep instinct recognized as home. Rebecca buried her face in Maya's dark hair and sobbed. Jonah stood awkwardly to the side, not sure if he had the right to be part of this moment. Rebecca looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have fought harder. I should have—" "Stop." Jonah crossed to her in 2 strides, wrapping his arms around both Rebecca and Maya. "None of this was your fault. None of it. We're together now. That's all that matters." The family court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the criminal trial ended, and those 21 days felt longer than the entire 3 months that had preceded them. Clara knew what was coming. She'd known from the beginning that Maya would eventually go to her biological parents, but knowing didn't make it easier. She stood in Ethan's kitchen, packing up the baby supplies she'd accumulated over the past months. Bottles and formula, tiny clothes that Maya had already outgrown, the soft yellow blanket that had become her favorite. Each item went into a box with careful precision, Clara's hands steady even as her heart was breaking. "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan said from the doorway. He'd been hovering all morning, watching her pack with an expression that mirrored her own grief. "Yes, I do. If I stop, if I let myself think about it too much, I won't be able to finish." Clara folded a small pink dress, remembering the day she'd bought it, how she'd imagined Maya wearing it to her first birthday party. She belongs with Rebecca and Jonah. I know that, but it doesn't make letting go any less painful. Maya was in the living room with Lucas, who'd stopped by under the pretense of a final checkup, but really just wanted to say goodbye. Through the doorway, Clara could see him making silly faces at the baby, could hear Maya's delighted laughter. 6 months old now, sitting up confidently, 2 teeth coming in, her personality emerging more every day. She was curious and stubborn and surprisingly funny for someone who couldn't yet talk. And in 3 hours, she'd be gone. The hearing itself was more formality than drama. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over family court for 20 years, reviewed the evidence with thoroughness that bordered on excessive. DNA results confirming Rebecca as Maya's mother. Jonah's paternity test, equally conclusive. Character references from people in Rebecca's life, former teachers, friends, even Maria Santos, who testified that Rebecca had always been kind and gentle, that her father's control had been the only darkness in her life. Dr. Gerald Rosen, who'd helped Victor orchestrate the deception, had provided detailed testimony about Rebecca's pregnancy and birth. In exchange for his cooperation, he'd received a reduced sentence, 5 years instead of 20, but his medical license was permanently revoked. He sat in the gallery, diminished and gray, a cautionary tale about the cost of compromising one's ethics. The court-appointed psychologist reported that Rebecca, now free from her father's medication regime, was mentally stable and capable of caring for a child. She'd spent the past 3 months in intensive therapy, working through the trauma of believing her baby was dead, processing the betrayal by her father, learning to trust again. Jonah had found work at a construction company in Red Willow, renting a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, but it was clean and safe and filled with the kind of hope that money couldn't buy. He'd spent his weekends building a crib, painting the nursery a soft lavender, installing safety locks on every cabinet, preparing for the daughter he'd never known he had. Rebecca had visited Maya 3 times in the past 2 weeks, supervised visits where Claire had watched them together, looking for signs of bonding, of recognition. Maya had been cautious at first, unsure about this woman who smelled different than Clara, who held her with a tentative gentleness that spoke of old wounds. But by the 3rd visit, Maya had reached for Rebecca voluntarily, had smiled when she'd heard her mother's voice. It was enough. It had to be enough. Judge Morrison reviewed the final documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose, then looked up at the assembled group. Rebecca and Jonah sat together at the plaintiff's table, holding hands, their faces pale but determined. Clara and Ethan were in the front row of the gallery, with Lucas, Tom, and Margaret beside them. A small crowd of supporters, witnesses to a miracle and a tragedy intertwined. This case, the judge began, is one of the most disturbing I've encountered in my career. A child abandoned to die, a mother deceived, a father's rights stolen before he even knew they existed. The crimes committed by Victor Hale are beyond comprehension. But this hearing isn't about punishment that's already been administered. This is about healing, about making whole what was broken. She paused, looking directly at Rebecca. Ms. Hale, you've suffered tremendously at your father's hands. The court recognizes the psychological trauma you've endured. However, the evaluations indicate you're making remarkable progress in your recovery. Dr. Chen's report states that with continued therapy and a strong support system, you're fully capable of providing a safe, loving home for your daughter. Rebecca's grip on Jonah's hand tightened. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Miller, you were deprived of the opportunity to be a father to your child for the first 6 months of her life. The court acknowledges this injustice. Your character references are exemplary. You've demonstrated commitment and responsibility in preparing for Maya's arrival in your home. Jonah nodded, his throat too tight for words. Judge Morrison turned her attention to Clara and Ethan. Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Cole, you saved this child's life, not just physically, though that alone would be remarkable. You provided her with love, stability, and protection when she had no one else. The court is deeply grateful for your service. However, she paused, and Clara felt her heart constrict. However, the law is clear. Custody must be granted to biological parents unless there's compelling evidence they're unfit. And in this case, there is no such evidence. Clara had known this was coming, had prepared herself for it, but the words still hit like a physical blow. Beside her, she felt Ethan go rigid, his hands clenched in his lap. Therefore, the judge continued, custody of Maya Rose Hale Miller is hereby granted to Rebecca Hale and Jonah Miller, with the following conditions: mandatory weekly therapy sessions for both parents, monthly home visits by Child Protective Services for the first year, and she looked over her glasses at Clara and Ethan. The court strongly encourages an open relationship with Ms. Whitmore and Mr. Cole. These individuals have formed a bond with Maya that shouldn't be severed completely. The court recommends regular visitation, if all parties are agreeable. Rebecca turned in her seat, looking back at Clara with tears streaming down her face. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Please don't disappear from her life. You gave her everything when I couldn't. I don't want Maya to lose you. Clara couldn't speak. She nodded, pressing her hand to her mouth to hold back the sobs threatening to escape. The judge signed the final papers with decisive strokes. Custody is effective immediately. Ms. Hale, Mr. Miller, your daughter is legally yours. Congratulations, and may you build the family you all deserve. The gavel fell, the sound echoing through the courtroom like the closing of a chapter. People stood, began gathering their things, the procedural machinery of the court moving forward to the next case. But Clara remained frozen in her seat, watching as Rebecca and Jonah walked to where Maya was being held by a court officer. Rebecca took her daughter now, officially and irrevocably, and Maya immediately snuggled into her mother's arms. She'd learned Rebecca's scent, her voice, the particular rhythm of her heartbeat. Biology and time were doing their work, knitting together what should never have been separated. Jonah stood beside them, one hand on Rebecca's shoulder, the other gently touching Maya's dark hair. He was crying openly, this strong young man who'd lost 3 years to fear and exile. His daughter looked up at him and smiled, reaching for his face with curious fingers. Dada, Maya babbled, the syllable meaningless, just sounds she was experimenting with. But Jonah's face crumpled, and he pulled both Rebecca and Maya into his arms, holding them like he'd never let go. Clara felt Ethan's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. They sat together in that courtroom, watching the family they'd helped save come together, and mourned the family they'd imagined but could never have. Outside the courthouse, the late October air was crisp and clean, carrying the first hint of the winter to come. Rebecca approached Clara and Ethan as they stood by Tom's truck, unsure what to say, how to navigate this new reality. I need you to know something, Rebecca said, adjusting Maya on her hip. The baby was chewing on a teething ring, content and oblivious to the adult drama surrounding her. I'm not taking her away from you. I can't. You're part of her story, part of who she is. Without you, she wouldn't be here at all. You don't have to, Clara started, but Rebecca cut her off. Yes, I do. Maya deserves to know all the people who love her. She deserves to grow up understanding that she was fought for, protected, cherished by more than just her parents. Rebecca shifted Maya to her other hip, taking a deep breath. Jonah and I talked about this. We want you to be her godparents, legally, officially. We want you in her life for all the milestones, all the important moments, birthday parties and school plays and graduation, everything. Ethan's hand tightened on Clara's. Rebecca, you don't owe us anything. This isn't about owing. This is about doing what's right for Maya. Rebecca looked between them, her eyes clear and certain. My father tried to destroy her because he couldn't control the circumstances of her birth. He saw her as shameful, as something to be hidden or eliminated. I won't let his hatred define her story. Maya is going to grow up surrounded by people who chose to love her, who fought for her, who refused to let her become another forgotten tragedy. Clara found herself nodding, tears streaming freely now. We'd be honored. Good, because we're going to need help. Jonah had approached, standing beside Rebecca with a nervous smile. Neither of us has any idea what we're doing. Rebecca's learning to be a mother after months of believing she'd lost that chance. I'm learning to be a father to a 6-month-old I didn't know existed until a few weeks ago. We're terrified. Welcome to parenthood, Lucas said, joining the group. Terror is pretty much the baseline emotion. But you're not doing this alone. None of us are. Margaret pushed through the small crowd, carrying several large bags. I brought supplies, diapers, wipes, formula, some freezer meals because new parents never remember to eat. Also a binder with schedules, Maya's feeding times, her nap routine, food she likes and doesn't like, the specific way she prefers to be rocked to sleep. She thrust the bags at Jonah, who took them automatically. Clara made detailed notes. Follow them. Yes, ma'am, Jonah said, slightly overwhelmed. Tom cleared his throat. If you folks need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning and you're worried about a fever. I don't care if you just need someone to hold the baby so you can take a shower. You're not alone in this. Rebecca looked around at the circle of people who'd fought for her daughter, who'd risked everything to make this moment possible, and something in her expression softened. My whole life, my father taught me that family was about blood and control, that love was conditional, something to be earned through obedience. But you chose to be Maya's family when you had no obligation to do so. You're teaching me what real family looks like. The first month of the new arrangement was harder than anyone expected. Rebecca and Jonah struggled with the basics of infant care, overwhelmed by the reality of a baby who needed constant attention. Maya, displaced from the only home she'd known, became fussy and difficult, crying for hours, refusing to sleep in the new crib Jonah had built. Clara's phone rang at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, Rebecca's voice frantic on the other end. I can't get her to stop crying. I've tried everything, feeding her, changing her, walking with her, singing to her. She's been screaming for 3 hours, and I don't know what to do. What if something's wrong? What if I'm doing this all wrong? You're not doing anything wrong, Clara said, already pulling on clothes. Babies go through adjustment periods. Her whole world changed. She needs time. Can you come over, please? I know it's late. I know you have work tomorrow, but I don't know who else to call. Clara was there in 15 minutes. She found Rebecca pacing the small living room, Maya red-faced and wailing in her arms, Jonah hovering anxiously nearby. The house was a disaster. Unwashed bottles in the sink, laundry piled on every surface. The exhaustion and chaos of new parents trying desperately to keep their heads above water. Let me see her, Clara said gently, taking Maya from Rebecca's trembling arms. The baby was hot and damp with tears, her small body rigid with distress. Clara pressed her close, swaying in the particular rhythm Maya preferred, humming the lullaby she'd sung every night for 4 months. Slowly, Maya's cries subsided. Her body relaxed against Clara's chest, her breathing evening out. Within 5 minutes, she was asleep. Rebecca sank onto the couch, her face in her hands. She calms down for you immediately. What am I doing wrong? You're not doing anything wrong, Clara repeated firmly. She sat beside Rebecca, Maya sleeping peacefully in her arms. She knows me because I was there for 4 months. But Rebecca, she's learning you now. Every day she's getting more comfortable with your voice, your smell, the way you hold her. This is temporary, I promise. Well, what if it's not? What if she never bonds with me the way she bonded with you? Clara looked at this young woman who'd survived so much, who'd lost years of her life to her father's cruelty, and felt her heart break a little. Rebecca, listen to me. Motherhood isn't about who the baby cries for at 2 a.m. It's about who shows up day after day, even when it's hard. Even when you're exhausted and scared and convinced you're failing. You're here. You're trying. That makes you her mother. Jonah sat on Rebecca's other side, putting his arm around her shoulders. We can do this. It's just going to take time. Clara stayed until dawn, teaching them the tricks she'd learned through trial and error. How to swaddle Maya just tight enough that she felt secure. How to recognize the difference between hungry cries and tired cries. How to warm a bottle to exactly the right temperature. All the small, crucial details that no parenting book quite captured. When Clara finally left, the sun was rising over Red Willow, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She drove back to her own apartment, the place she'd barely seen in 4 months, and stood in the middle of her empty living room, feeling the silence press against her like a physical weight. The nursery she'd created in Ethan's spare room was gone now. The crib and supplies moved to Rebecca and Jonah's house. Her routine had vanished overnight. No more 3 a.m. feedings, no more afternoons playing on the floor while Maya practiced rolling over, no more bedtime stories read to an audience who couldn't understand the words, but loved the sound of Clara's voice. She'd known this was coming, had prepared for it, braced herself for the impact. But knowing didn't make the emptiness easier to bear. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "You okay?" Clara stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "No, but I will be." Ethan showed up at her apartment an hour later with coffee and breakfast burritos from the diner. They sat on her couch, eating in comfortable silence. Two people who'd become family through crisis and were now trying to figure out what they were to each other without a baby to care for. "The house is too quiet," Ethan said finally. "I keep hearing her crying even though she's not there. I keep checking the nursery and remembering it's empty. I keep making bottles at feeding times. My body hasn't adjusted to the new schedule yet. Lucas says it takes time, that we're grieving a loss even though Maya's still alive, still safe, still part of our lives." Clara set down her burrito, no longer hungry. "I feel guilty for grieving. She's with her real parents. She's where she belongs. I should be happy for her. You can be happy for her and sad for yourself at the same time. Both things are allowed." They sat together as the morning light filled Clara's small apartment, two broken people who'd found purpose in protecting a child who wasn't theirs, now trying to figure out who they were without that purpose. The visitations became routine over the next few months. Every Sunday, Clara and Ethan would drive to Rebecca and Jonah's house for dinner. They'd spend the afternoon playing with Maya, watching her grow and change, marking the milestones. Her first word, "Mama," spoken clearly while looking right at Rebecca, who'd cried with joy. Her first successful crawl, zooming across the floor toward Jonah. Her first tooth, her first laugh at a joke, her first time feeding herself. Christmas arrived with unexpected warmth. Rebecca and Jonah had invited everyone, Clara, Ethan, Lucas, Tom, Margaret, Maria Santos, to celebrate together. The small house was packed with people, the dining table barely large enough for everyone to squeeze around. Maya, now 9 months old and pulling herself up on furniture, was passed from person to person, soaking up the attention. "I want to propose a toast," Jonah said, standing with his glass of sparkling cider raised. "To the people who saved my daughter's life. To Ethan, who heard her crying when anyone else would have ridden past. To Clara, who loved her when she had no one. To Lucas, who fought for her health. To Tom, who fought for justice. To Margaret and Maria, who risked everything to tell the truth." His voice caught. "Maya is alive because of all of you. She has a future because you refused to let her become another tragedy. Rebecca and I, we can never repay that debt." "You don't owe us anything," Clara said softly. "Loving Maya was never a burden. It was a privilege." Rebecca stood, lifting Maya from her high chair. "I used to think my father's hatred had destroyed my life, that I'd never recover from what he took from me. But looking around this table, at all of you, I realize he didn't destroy my life. He tried. But you built something better than what I lost. You gave me a family that chose each other, that fights for each other, that loves without conditions." She kissed Maya's forehead. "My daughter will grow up knowing what real family looks like, and that's the best gift you could have given us." The winter passed into spring, and spring into summer. Maya's first birthday approached, and Rebecca insisted on throwing a party that included everyone who'd been part of their journey. The celebration was held at Tom's ranch, which had more space than Rebecca and Jonah's small house. There were balloons and streamers. A cake shaped like a butterfly, presents piled high on a table. Maya, wearing a pink dress that Margaret had sewn by hand, toddled between the adults on unsteady legs, delighted by the attention. She'd grown into a confident, happy child, secure in the love of her parents and the extended family that surrounded her. Ethan watched Clara playing with Maya in the grass, the baby's laughter ringing across the yard, and felt something shift in his chest. Over the past year, he and Clara had become inseparable. They had dinner together most nights, alternating between his ranch and her apartment. They attended Maya's doctor visits together, babysat when Rebecca and Jonah needed a break, shared the quiet moments and the chaotic ones. Somewhere along the way, without either of them really noticing, they'd fallen in love. It wasn't the passionate, overwhelming love of youth. It was something deeper, quieter, the love of two people who'd survived their own hells and found peace in each other's company, who understood grief and guilt and the long road to forgiveness, both of others and of themselves. "You're staring," Tom said, appearing at Ethan's elbow with 2 beers. "Just thinking." About how you're going to ask Clara to marry you? Ethan took the offered beer, not bothering to deny it. That obvious? To anyone paying attention, yeah. You've been carrying your grandmother's ring in your pocket for a month. Every time you look at her, your whole face changes. And before you ask, yes, she feels the same way. Also obvious to anyone paying attention. What if it's too soon? What if we're just clinging to each other because of Maya, because of what we went through? Tom shook his head. Ethan, I've known you for 8 years. In that time, I've watched you exist rather than live. You were a ghost in your own life, punishing yourself for a mistake you'd never forgive yourself for. Then Maya happened, and Clara happened, and you came back to life. Don't waste time questioning it. Life's too short and too uncertain. That night, after the party wound down and the guests departed, after Rebecca and Jonah took an exhausted Maya home to bed, Ethan asked Clara to stay for a walk around Tom's property. They walked in comfortable silence, the summer stars bright overhead, the air warm and still. I need to tell you something, Ethan said, stopping near the old oak tree at the edge of Tom's land. About Emma, about the fire. Clara waited, patient, letting him find the words. For 8 years, I've been telling myself I didn't deserve to be happy, that I'd lost the right to have a family, to love someone, to want anything for myself. Emma died because I was careless, and I convinced myself that being alone was my punishment, my penance. He turned to face Clara fully. But this past year, being with you, helping raise Maya, I realized something. Emma wouldn't have wanted this for me. She was 2 years old, Clara. She loved without conditions, trusted without fear, forgave without hesitation. If she could speak to me now, she wouldn't want me to spend my life alone and miserable. She'd want me to live, to love, to try again. Tears were streaming down Clara's face. Ethan, let me finish. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Not just purpose, though you did that too. You gave me hope. You showed me that broken people can still build beautiful things, that the past doesn't have to define the future. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. I know this is complicated. I know we're still figuring things out, still healing. But Clara Whitmore, I love you. And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, building a life together that honors everything we've survived and everything we've become. Will you marry me? Clara looked at the ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond, elegant and perfect. Then at Ethan's face, at the hope and fear and love written there. She thought about her own journey, about losing Emma and David, about the years of grief and emptiness, about finding Maya and finding Ethan and finding herself again in the process. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, and they stood together under the stars, two people who'd lost everything and found each other, who'd learned that love doesn't erase grief but gives you the strength to carry it. The wedding was small and simple, held in Tom's backyard on a perfect September afternoon. Rebecca and Jonah stood as witnesses, Maya toddling between them in a white dress. Lucas officiated, his voice steady and warm, as he spoke about love and family and second chances. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony, as did Maria Santos, who'd become a regular fixture in their extended family. When Ethan and Clara exchanged vows, they didn't speak about forever or eternity. They spoke about choosing each other, day by day, in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow, for as long as they were given. They promised to honor their pasts while building their future, to remember the children they'd lost while loving the child they'd helped save. And as they kissed for the first time as husband and wife, Maya clapped her small hands and shouted, "Yay!" with such enthusiasm that everyone laughed through their tears. Victor Hale died in prison 18 months into his sentence. Heart attack, the prison officials said. Quick and relatively painless, which was more mercy than he'd shown his granddaughter. Rebecca didn't attend the funeral. She sent no flowers, offered no statements to the press. She simply continued living her life, raising her daughter, building a future that had nothing to do with the man who'd tried to destroy them all. The Hale estate was sold at auction, the proceeds divided between Rebecca and various creditors. Rebecca used her portion to buy a modest house with a yard where Maya could play, to start a college fund, to donate to organizations that helped abuse survivors. She wanted nothing that carried her father's taint, nothing built on the foundation of his cruelty. Jonah proposed to her on a quiet Tuesday evening. No fanfare, just the two of them and Maya in their small living room. He got down on one knee and offered her a simple ring and a simple promise: to love her and their daughter for the rest of his life, to build a family based on choice and respect and the kind of love that couldn't be controlled or corrupted. Rebecca said yes without hesitation. They were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, witnessed by Clara and Ethan, officially becoming the family they'd been in practice for over a year. Maya, now almost 2 years old and talking in full sentences, served as flower girl, taking her job very seriously as she scattered rose petals with intense concentration. Life settled into a new normal. Clara returned to teaching, filling her classroom with the same love she'd poured into Maya. Ethan continued working his ranch, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like home, especially after Clara moved in, bringing her books and her warmth and her laughter. They visited Rebecca, Jonah, and Maya at least twice a week. They babysat regularly, giving the young parents time to breathe. They were there for Maya's first day of preschool, for her dance recitals, for every milestone that marked her journey from the baby in a box to a thriving, happy child. And sometimes, in quiet moments, Ethan would think about that day 3 years ago when he'd heard crying in the wilderness. How easily he could have been riding a different fence line, checking a different section of the property. How close they'd all come to a different ending, a tragedy instead of a miracle. But he hadn't ridden a different line. He'd heard that cry and followed it, and that single decision had changed everything. It had saved Maya's life. It had brought justice to a monster. It had given Rebecca and Jonah their daughter. It had led him to Clara, to love, to redemption he hadn't believed possible. Standing in his kitchen one evening, watching Clara help Maya bake cookies while flour dusted every surface, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in over a decade: complete and utter peace. His daughter Emma would always be part of him, her memory a bittersweet ache that never quite faded. But alongside that ache was joy, gratitude, hope for the future. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, moments of grief that caught him by surprise. But there were also moments like this: flower-covered chaos and childish laughter, and love that filled every corner of his once empty house. And that Ethan had learned was more than enough. It was Maya's persistent questions that brought everything full circle 5 years later. She was 7 years old now, in second grade, with her mother's delicate features and her father's honest eyes. Smart as a whip and curious about everything, she'd recently developed an obsession with family trees after a school project about ancestry. "Mama," she asked one evening while Rebecca helped her with homework, "why do I have 4 parents instead of 2? Rebecca looked up from the math worksheet they'd been reviewing, her pen pausing mid-correction. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "Lucy at school says people only have 1 mom and 1 dad. But I have you and Daddy, and I also have Aunt Clara and Uncle Ethan, and you all act like my parents. So which ones are my real parents?" Rebecca set down her pen, her heart clenching at the question she'd known would come eventually, but had hoped to delay a little longer. "Come here, baby girl." Maya climbed into her mother's lap, still small enough to curl there comfortably, though growing taller every day. Rebecca wrapped her arms around her daughter and took a deep breath. "You're right that most kids have 1 mom and 1 dad. But your family is special. It's bigger than most families, and that's because a lot of people loved you right from the very beginning." "Tell me the story again," Maya said, settling against her mother's chest. "About how I was found." It was a story Maya had heard before, though always in simplified versions appropriate for her age. The bad man who'd left her in the desert, the cowboy who'd heard her crying, the teacher who'd cared for her, the brave people who'd fought to keep her safe. But this time, sensing her daughter was ready for more truth, Rebecca decided to tell it differently. "A long time ago, before you were born, I fell in love with your daddy. His name is Jonah, and he was the kindest man I'd ever met. But my father, your grandfather, didn't approve. He was a very controlling man who wanted everything done his way. When he found out I was going to have a baby, he was angry. He sent your daddy away and told me lies about what happened." Maya's small hand found Rebecca's, squeezing gently. "What kind of lies?" "He told me you died when you were born, that you were sick and couldn't survive. I believed him because I didn't know he would lie about something so important. For months I was so sad I could barely breathe. I thought I'd lost you forever. But I didn't die. No, baby, you didn't die. My father had someone take you out to the desert and leave you there, hoping no one would find you. It was a terrible, evil thing to do, but he didn't count on Uncle Ethan. Maya sat up straighter. Uncle Ethan saved me. He did. He was riding his horse, checking fences like he did every week when he heard a baby crying. Most people wouldn't have heard it. Most people would have been too far away or too busy. But Uncle Ethan heard you, and he followed the sound until he found a wooden crate with a little baby inside. That baby was you. And then what happened? Rebecca smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. Then Uncle Ethan scooped you up and rode as fast as he could to town. He took you to Dr. Lucas, who's a very good doctor. Dr. Lucas and Uncle Ethan saved your life that day, but you still needed someone to take care of you while the police tried to figure out who you belonged to. That's when Aunt Clara came into the story. Aunt Clara loves me a lot, Maya observed with the simple certainty of childhood. She does. She loved you from the very first moment she saw you. Aunt Clara had lost a baby daughter before you were born, so she understood how precious and fragile life is. She and Uncle Ethan took care of you for months. They fed you and changed you and rocked you to sleep. They protected you from the people who wanted to hurt you, and during that time they fell in love with you so much that you became part of their hearts forever. Maya processed this information with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. So, Aunt Clara and Uncle Ethan are my parents too? Even though they're not my real parents? Maya, listen to me carefully. Your real parents are the people who love you and take care of you and show up for you every single day. Biology matters. Yes, you have my eyes and your daddy's smile and your grandmother Maria's stubbornness. But being a parent is about more than DNA. It's about choosing to love someone, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when the whole world seems against you. Rebecca kissed the top of Maya's head. Your daddy and I are your parents because we made you, because our love created you. But Aunt Clara and Uncle Ethan are your parents too, in a different way. They chose you when they didn't have to. They fought for you when it would have been easier to walk away. They loved you before they even knew your name. All four of us are your real parents, Maya. You're just lucky enough to have twice as much love as most kids. Maya was quiet for a long moment, her 7-year-old mind working through the complexities of her origin story. Finally, she looked up at her mother with those serious blue-gray eyes. I'm glad Uncle Ethan found me. I'm glad Aunt Clara took care of me. I'm glad you got me back. I'm glad I have so many people who love me. She paused. But Mama, I'm also sad. Sad about what, sweetheart? About the bad grandfather. About how he hurt you and tried to hurt me. Why would someone do that? Rebecca felt her throat tighten. This was the part she'd been dreading, the question that had no good answer. Sometimes people are so afraid of things they can't control that they do terrible things. My father wanted everything in his life to be perfect, the way he imagined it should be. When something didn't fit his perfect picture, he tried to erase it. It was wrong. It was evil. But Maya, you need to understand something. His cruelty says everything about who he was and nothing about who you are. Is he still alive? No, baby. He died a long time ago, when you were very little. He can't hurt anyone anymore. Maya nodded slowly, then surprised Rebecca by asking, Do you miss him? The question caught Rebecca off guard. She'd spent years in therapy working through her complicated feelings about Victor Hale, the father who'd controlled her childhood, who'd isolated her from normal relationships, who'd ultimately tried to murder her daughter. Did she miss him? I miss the father I wished I had, Rebecca said finally. The father who should have loved me without conditions, who should have protected me instead of controlling me. But the real man, the one who did such terrible things? No, Maya, I don't miss him. And I'm not sad that he's gone. That probably sounds harsh, but it's the truth. Maya accepted this with the resilience of children who haven't yet learned that family relationships should always be simple. Can we call Aunt Clara and Uncle Ethan? I want to tell them I love them. Rebecca's heart swelled. Of course we can, baby. Of course we can. The phone call turned into an impromptu dinner invitation. Within an hour, Clara and Ethan had arrived at Rebecca and Jonah's house, bringing fresh bread from Margaret and a casserole that Lucas had somehow convinced them to deliver on his behalf. The extended family gathered around the dinner table. Rebecca and Jonah, Maya, Clara, and Ethan, plus Margaret, who'd stopped by with dessert and decided to stay. Maya, emboldened by her earlier conversation with Rebecca, announced to the table, "I learned today that I have 4 parents instead of 2, and that makes me special." Ethan nearly choked on his water. Clara's eyes immediately filled with tears. Jonah looked at Rebecca with raised eyebrows, and Rebecca gave him a small nod that said she'd explain later. "You are very special," Clara said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze Maya's hand. "The most special girl in the whole world." "Uncle Ethan, tell me about finding me again. The real story, not the kid version." Ethan set down his fork, glancing at Rebecca for permission. She nodded again. He'd never told Maya the full truth before, had always softened the edges, made it sound less desperate than it had been. "All right," he said slowly. "The real story. I was riding fence line on the old Thompson property. It was August, brutally hot, the kind of day where the heat makes you see things that aren't there. I was thinking about turning back when my horse Rust suddenly stopped. He heard something I couldn't hear yet, a sound so faint I almost missed it." Maya leaned forward, captivated despite having heard versions of this story dozens of times. "It was crying, a baby crying in the middle of nowhere. I followed the sound to a wooden crate hidden under some cottonwood trees. Someone had nailed it shut and drilled tiny air holes in the top. When I pried it open and saw you inside," his voice caught. "You were barely alive, Maya. Your skin was burning, your lips were cracked, you weren't moving. I thought I was too late." "But you weren't too late. No, you grabbed my finger when I picked you up. This tiny, weak grip that told me you were still fighting. So I fought too. I rode faster than I've ever ridden, straight to Dr. Lucas's clinic, praying the whole way that you'd hold on just a little longer." "And Aunt Clara? When did you meet Aunt Clara?" Clara picked up the story. "I came to the clinic that first night. Dr. Lucas called me because he knew I'd want to help. When I saw you lying in that hospital crib, so small and fragile, something in my heart just—" She paused, searching for words. "It broke and healed at the same time. I'd lost my daughter Emma 4 years before. I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd never get to be a mother again. But then there you were, needing someone to love you, and I realized maybe I'd get a second chance after all. Did you know I wasn't going to stay with you forever?" The question was asked with such innocent directness that Clara had to take a moment before answering. "Yes, sweetheart. We always knew that if we found your real parents, you'd go back to them. That was always the goal, to keep you safe until we could reunite you with the people who made you. But knowing that didn't make it easier to let you go when the time came." "Were you sad?" "I was devastated," Clara admitted. "The day we took you to your mom and dad, I cried for hours. Uncle Ethan and I both did. The house felt so empty without you. We missed your crying at 3 a.m., missed your little laugh, missed everything about you." Maya's face crumpled with empathy beyond her years. "I'm sorry I made you sad." "Oh no, baby." Clara was out of her chair in an instant, kneeling beside Maya. "You didn't make us sad. Losing you made us sad, but having you in our lives first, that was the greatest gift. And we didn't really lose you, did we? Because we still get to see you all the time. We still get to watch you grow up and be part of your life. That's more than we ever hoped for." Ethan cleared his throat roughly. "Your Aunt Clara's right. When we said goodbye that first time, we thought that was it. We thought we'd maybe see you once or twice a year if your parents felt generous. But your mom and dad, they understood that you belonged to all of us. They made us part of your family, and that's a gift we'll never take for granted." Rebecca reached across the table to grasp Ethan's hand. "You saved my daughter's life. You and Clara gave her love when she had nothing. How could we not make you part of our family? Maya exists because of you. She's healthy and happy because of you. You're not just her godparents. You're her parents in every way that matters." Jonah nodded firmly. "When Rebecca and I got married, we made a promise to each other. We'd raise Maya to understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up, who fight for you, who choose to love you, even when it costs them something. You two showed us what that looks like." Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "Look at all of you, making an old woman cry into her pot roast. But I'll say this, I've lived in Red Willow for 63 years, and I've never seen a family quite like this one. built from tragedy and love and sheer stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. Maya, you pay attention to what these people are teaching you about love. It's a lesson most folks never learn. The dinner continued with lighter conversation, but something had shifted. By speaking the truth plainly, by acknowledging the complexity of their relationships, they'd strengthened the bonds that held them together. Maya seemed more settled, more secure in her understanding of where she belonged. After dinner, while the adults cleaned up, Maya pulled out her family tree project. She'd drawn a traditional tree with branches and leaves, but instead of putting 2 names at the roots, she'd drawn 4: Rebecca, Jonah, Clara, and Ethan. Additional branches extended to Lucas, Margaret, Tom, Maria, and several others who'd been part of her story. "My teacher said I did it wrong," Maya explained to Clara as they sat on the living room floor. "She said family trees only have your real family, not your friends." Clara studied the drawing carefully. "Your teacher is wrong. This is exactly what a family tree should look like. All the people who helped you grow, who gave you roots and branches, who made you who you are. This is perfect, Maya." "That's what Mama said. But the other kids at school don't understand. They think it's weird that I have so many people." "People fear what they don't understand. Your family is different from most families. That's true. But different doesn't mean wrong. Different can mean special, unique, stronger." Clara pulled Maya close. "You know what I think? I think the other kids are probably a little jealous. They have 2 parents who love them, which is wonderful. But you have 4 parents, plus a whole village of people who do anything for you. That's not weird, sweetheart. That's magic." The conversation with Maya sparked something in Ethan that had been building for months. That night, lying in bed next to Clara, he finally voiced the thought that had been nagging at him. "I want to adopt her." Clara turned to look at him in the darkness. "What?" "Maya. I want to officially adopt her. Make it legal, not just emotional. She calls us her parents, but we have no legal rights, no official standing. If something happened to Rebecca and Jonah tomorrow, we'd have no claim to her. She could be sent to distant relatives, people who don't know her, don't love her the way we do." "Ethan, we can't just adopt someone else's child. I know, that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about a shared custody arrangement, or co-guardianship, or whatever the legal term is. Something that acknowledges what everyone already knows, that Maya has 4 parents, not 2. That we're not just family friends or godparents. We're her family in every real sense." Clara sat up, turning on the bedside lamp. Her hair was mussed from sleep, her expression thoughtful. "Have you talked to Rebecca and Jonah about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, make sure I wasn't crazy." "You're not crazy." Clara touched his face gently. "But Ethan, what you're describing is complicated, legally, emotionally, practically. 4 parents means 4 people making decisions about schooling, healthcare, discipline. What if we disagree with Rebecca and Jonah about something important? What if they want to move and take Maya with them? Are we prepared for that level of entanglement? I'm already that entangled. So are you. We're at every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's appointment, every school play. We help with homework and birthday parties and middle-of-the-night emergencies. The only thing we don't have is the legal paperwork that matches the reality we're already living." Clara was quiet for a long moment, considering. "You're right," she said finally. "We should talk to them, see if they'd even be open to the idea. Because you're right, this is already our reality. We might as well make it official." The conversation with Rebecca and Jonah happened the following Sunday over coffee at their kitchen table. Ethan was nervous, his palms sweating as he tried to explain what he wanted without sounding like he was trying to take their daughter away from them. "Let me make sure I understand," Jonah said carefully after Ethan had finished. "You want to legally adopt Maya, sharing custody with Rebecca and me?" "Not exactly custody, more like legal guardianship, recognition that Clara and I have parental rights and responsibilities, that we're not just friends who help out, but actual parents with actual standing." Rebecca's hands were wrapped around her coffee mug, her expression unreadable. "Why now? You've been Maya's godparents for years. What changed?" Clara spoke up. "She's getting older, more aware of what her family looks like compared to other families. Questions are going to get harder as she grows up. Questions about who makes decisions, who she belongs to, where home really is. We thought it might be easier for everyone, especially Maya, if we clarified the legal relationship. And if we say no, Jonah asked, not confrontationally but genuinely curious, if we say we appreciate everything you've done, but we're not comfortable sharing legal custody? Ethan forced himself to meet Jonah's eyes. Then we accept that. We'd be disappointed, but we'd understand. You're her parents. You have every right to set boundaries. We wouldn't love Maya any less or disappear from her life. We'd just continue as we have been. Rebecca set down her coffee mug with a decisive click. I don't want you to continue as you have been. Ethan's heart sank. He'd pushed too far, asked for too much. I want it to be official, Rebecca continued, her eyes bright with tears. I want Maya to grow up knowing that she has 4 parents who are equally committed to her, who have equal legal standing, who can make decisions for her if something happens to Jonah and me. I want her to know that love doesn't have to fit traditional definitions to be real and valid and protected by law. You're serious? Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. Completely serious. Jonah and I talked about this months ago, actually, about making your guardianship official. We just didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like we were trying to give our daughter away. Jonah nodded. You're already her parents in every way except legally. You make decisions about her education, her health, her well-being. You show up when she's sick, celebrate when she succeeds, comfort her when she's scared. Why shouldn't that be recognized officially? The legal process took 6 months to navigate. Co-parenting arrangements weren't exactly common, and the family court judge assigned to their case initially balked at the idea of 4 legal parents for 1 child. But their lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in non-traditional family structures, built a compelling case. She presented documentation of Ethan and Clara's involvement in Maya's life. Medical records showing they'd authorized treatments, school forms listing them as emergency contacts with decision-making authority, statements from teachers, doctors, and community members attesting to their parental role. Even Maya herself, at 7 years old, submitted a letter to the judge explaining why she wanted 4 parents officially instead of just 2 parents and 2 special friends. The hearing itself was surprisingly emotional. All 4 parents testified about their commitment to Maya and to each other. Luca spoke about how they'd worked together to save Maya's life. Tom discussed the importance of stability and multiple caregivers. Margaret made the entire courtroom cry when she talked about watching this unconventional family love a child back from the edge of death. Judge Patricia Morrison, the same judge who'd granted custody to Rebecca and Jonah years earlier, listened to everything with her characteristic thoroughness. When all the testimony was complete, she removed her glasses and looked at the 4 adults standing before her. I've been a family court judge for 23 years, she said. I've seen every kind of custody battle, every permutation of parental rights and responsibilities. I've seen families torn apart by conflict, children used as weapons, love twisted into something ugly and destructive. She paused. This is not that. This is 4 people who genuinely love a child and each other, who want to formalize an arrangement that's already working beautifully. Frankly, more traditional families could learn something from you. She signed the papers with a flourish. Effective immediately, Clara Cole and Ethan Cole are granted shared legal guardianship of Maya Rose Hale Miller with all attendant rights and responsibilities. This is a co-parenting arrangement between 4 equal parents. Congratulations to all of you, and congratulations to Maya for being one of the luckiest children I've ever encountered. The celebration that followed was quiet but profound. They went back to Ethan and Clara's ranch, the place where so much of this story had unfolded, for dinner. Margaret had prepared Maya's favorite meal. Lucas brought sparkling cider. Tom showed up with a ridiculously large teddy bear for Maya and handshakes for everyone else. Maya seemed to understand that something important had happened, even if she couldn't fully grasp the legal complexities. So now you're officially my parents? She asked Clara and Ethan. Officially and legally, Clara confirmed. Just like your mom and dad. Good, Maya said with satisfaction. Now when kids at school ask why I have 4 parents, I can tell them it's because I'm special and the judge said so. That night, after everyone had gone home and Maya was asleep in the guest room she thought of as her second bedroom, the 4 parents sat on Ethan's porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I never thought my life would look like this, Rebecca said softly. When I was pregnant, hiding from my father's anger, I imagined raising my baby alone, Just me and her against the world. I never imagined I'd have a partner like Jonah, a support system like all of you. I never thought I'd get a second chance at being a father, Jonah added. I'd accepted that I'd lost Rebecca and the baby I didn't even know existed, finding out I had a daughter, getting to be part of her life. It's more than I ever hoped for. Clara leaned against Ethan's shoulder. I thought loving Maya would be enough, being her godmother, the special aunt who got to spoil her and love her without the legal complications. But Ethan was right. We needed it to be official. We needed the world to recognize what we all already knew. Ethan looked up at the stars, thinking about the journey that had brought them all here. A baby crying in the desert, a desperate ride to town. Months of hiding and fighting and refusing to give up. A trial that exposed evil and brought justice. And somehow, through all of it, the forging of a family that defied every conventional definition. Emma would have loved this, he said quietly. My daughter. She would have loved Maya, loved all of you. I spent so many years thinking her death was the end of my story, that I'd used up my chance at family, at fatherhood, at happiness. But maybe, he paused, struggling with the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Maybe losing her wasn't the end. Maybe it was just a terrible chapter in a longer story. One that led me here, to all of you, to this impossible, beautiful family we've built. Rebecca reached across the space between their chairs to grasp his hand. Emma's part of this family too. Her and Clara's Emma, and all the people we've lost along the way. They're part of what made us who we are, part of what taught us to fight for the children who survived. We carry them with us. They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness fell. 4 people who'd come together through tragedy and love and sheer determination. Inside the house, Maya slept peacefully, surrounded by the certainty of being loved by more people than most children could imagine. Outside, the Texas sky stretched endless and star-filled, bearing witness to a family that had chosen each other against all odds. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Maya struggled in 4th grade with math, requiring tutoring sessions split between all 4 parents. She broke her arm falling off her bike at 10, sending everyone into a panic that resulted in all 4 parents showing up at the emergency room. She went through a phase at 12 where she tested boundaries, playing her parents against each other, until a unified front meeting resulted in consistent rules across both households. But there were also moments of unexpected beauty. Maya's middle school graduation, where she insisted on thanking all 4 parents in her speech. Her first serious boyfriend at 16, who had to navigate getting approval from 4 protective parents instead of 2. Her acceptance to college with a full scholarship, the result of years of support from multiple adults who prioritized her education. Through it all, the family remained solid. Rebecca and Jonah's marriage thrived. Clara and Ethan's partnership deepened. The relationships between all 4 parents evolved into something that went beyond co-parenting into genuine friendship and love. They celebrated holidays together, took vacations as an extended family, supported each other through job changes and health scares and the ordinary difficulties of life. When Maya turned 18 and prepared to leave for college, they threw a joint party that filled Ethan's ranch to capacity. Friends and family from across the years gathered to celebrate. Lucas, now retired but still sharp as ever. Margaret, moving slower but still cooking for crowds. Tom, finally thinking about retirement himself. Maria Santos, who'd become a grandmother figure to Maya. Even Dale Morrison, the construction worker who'd helped Victor Hale build that terrible crate and had spent years trying to make amends. Maya stood before the gathered crowd, a confident young woman who bore little resemblance to the fragile infant who'd almost died in the desert 18 years earlier. She was strong and intelligent and fiercely compassionate, shaped by the love of 4 parents and an entire community who'd refused to let her become a tragedy. Most people spend their lives trying to figure out who they are and where they belong, Maya said, her voice steady despite the emotion clear on her face. I've always known. I belonged to 4 parents who loved me enough to fight for me when it would have been easier to walk away. I belonged to a community that protected me when I was too small to protect myself. I belonged to a story that started with evil, but ended with love. She looked at Rebecca and Jonah, at Clara and Ethan. I know my story is unusual. I know most families don't look like ours, but I wouldn't change a single thing about how I grew up. You taught me that family is about choice, not obligation. That love isn't diminished by being shared, it multiplies. That the worst thing that happens to you doesn't have to define you if you're surrounded by people who refuse to let darkness win. Maya pulled out 4 small boxes, handing one to each parent. I made these for you. Open them. Inside each box was a silver pendant on a chain. Each pendant was engraved with the same words. Maya's heart, 1/4. 4 pieces of my heart, Maya explained, tears streaming down her face now. One for each of you, because you each hold an equal part of who I am and who I've become. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for sharing me with each other. Thank you for showing me what real family looks like. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Rebecca and Jonah, Clara and Ethan, all 4 parents wearing matching pendants, standing together as the young woman they'd raised prepared to step into her own life. The baby who shouldn't have survived, who'd been left to die in a wooden crate in the Texas desert, was now heading to Stanford University on a full scholarship to study social work, planning to dedicate her life to helping children in crisis. That night, long after the party ended and the guests departed, the core family sat together one last time before Maya's departure. They were on Ethan's porch again, the place where so many important conversations had happened over the years. I'm scared, Maya admitted. Not about college, about leaving all of you. This family is my foundation. What if I can't figure out who I am without you right here? Clara smiled. Then you call. Anytime, day or night. You call, and one of us will answer. Because, sweetheart, this family isn't defined by geography. We're not going anywhere. Your Aunt Clara's right, Jonah said. We're only a phone call away. And there are breaks, holidays, summers. You'll get sick of us showing up at your dorm. Never, Maya said fiercely. I could never get sick of you. Ethan stood, walking to the porch railing to look out at the dark landscape. You know what I think about sometimes? That day I found you. How many things had to align perfectly for that moment to happen? If I'd ridden out an hour earlier or later, if the wind had been blowing wrong, if Rust hadn't heard you crying, any one of those variables changes and you die in that box, alone and unmissed. But they didn't change, Maya said softly. No, they didn't. And I've spent 18 years trying to understand why. Why you survived when so many don't. Why I got a second chance at being a father when I didn't deserve one. Why all of us found each other in the middle of tragedy and built something beautiful. He turned back to face them, his weathered face illuminated by the porch light. I don't think there's a grand reason. I don't think the universe planned this or meant for it to happen. I think terrible things happen and good people respond, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, love wins. That's what happened here. Love won. It won when I decided to follow that crying instead of riding past. It won when Clara chose to help instead of protecting her own heart. It won when Rebecca fought through her father's manipulation to reclaim her daughter. It won when Jonah came back to claim his family. Love won, Maya. And you're the proof. Maya walked to Ethan, wrapping her arms around him in a fierce hug. I love you, Dad. It was the first time she'd called him that without a qualifier, not Uncle Ethan or my other dad or any of the creative terms she'd used over the years. Just Dad. Simple and perfect and true. I love you too, kiddo, Ethan said, his voice rough. More than you'll ever know. They stood together on that porch as the night deepened around them. 4 parents and 1 daughter, bound not by blood alone, but by choice and sacrifice and love that had survived every test. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, while below them a family held each other close and prepared to let go, knowing that some bonds can stretch across any distance without breaking. In the distance, a coyote called into the darkness. The sound carried across the empty desert, lonely and wild and free. It was the same landscape where a baby had once cried out in desperate hope, where a cowboy had chosen to listen, where love had refused to accept tragedy as the final word. And 18 years later, that baby, now a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, stood surrounded by the people who'd fought for her survival and learned something her attempted murderer had never understood. That love, real love, doesn't count the cost. It simply shows up again and again, choosing the harder path because it's the right one. That's what family meant to them. Not perfection or convention or meeting anyone's expectations. Just showing up, just choosing each other, just refusing to let darkness have the final say. And as they stood together in the quiet night, 4 parents and their daughter, they knew that whatever came next, college and careers, marriages, and maybe someday grandchildren, all the ordinary miracles of life moving forward, they would face it together. Because that's what families do, especially families like theirs, built from ashes and hope and the stubborn conviction that love is always worth fighting for. Always.